I want to begin with a story. One warm June weekend in 2011, a 10-year-old girl was up north on Lake Michigan with her family. Being the sassy girl that she was taunting her brother by holding the bag of chips above her head so he couldn't reach them. Her brother was 3 years older and definitely taller, so it wasn't as effective as she hoped. Her dad snapped a picture of the funny moment. Little did everyone know, that would be the last time that little girl would be able to raise her arms above her head. The very next day, her back began to swell, and she hasn't stretched her arms in the 9 years since. That little girl was me. My name is Natalie McGuire. I am a 19-year-old junior at the University of Michigan. I am a daughter, a sister, a friend, a dog person, a feminist, a Canadian, an immigrant, an avid reader, a music lover, and so many other things. The thing that I'm probably the least likely to tell you is that I am disabled. I like to think of myself as a person with a disability rather than a disabled person. While this seems like a silly thing to the able body, I don't want my disability to define me. It is a part of who I am, but it isn't my entire identity. Upon first glance, you probably won't notice I'm disabled. I'm not in a wheelchair, and I don't use any other assistive mobility devices. I also have full mental capacity. My disability is fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva. Fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, or FOP for short, is one of the world's rarest diseases and the only known to man that turns one organ system into another. It is estimated to affect approximately 1 in 2 million people. Or to put it in a more visual sense, that's one person for every 20 big houses, which is the Michigan football stadium, for those of you unaware. To put it in simple terms, it turns muscles, ligaments, and tendons into bone. FOP appears at a variety of ages in different patients, but it primarily manifests in children and progresses over a lifetime. As you grow older, it only gets worse and more debilitating. Although FOP will progress without any trauma, injuries certainly make it worse. What might be a simple bump on the head or bruised knee for other kids can spell disaster for those with FOP. This often leads parents to become extremely precautious and can lead to FOP kids feeling robbed of their childhood. Another complication of FOP is that it is often misdiagnosed due to its rarity, leading to invasive treatment that can have disastrous results. People with FOP often have stories about undergoing biopsies to test for cancer or even amputations, which were not only unnecessary but led to explosive bone growth and other harms. The one outward indicator that someone may have FOP prior to bone growth is the stunted big toe. I was diagnosed with FOP in 2011 when I was 10 years old. That same year, I lost all upward mobility of my arms. In the span of 3 months, I went from full physical functioning to not being able to raise my arms above my head. This was the result of bone forming under my arm that prohibits movement. My FOP was fairly dormant for the next few years, with small flare-ups here and there. It came back in full force in December 2016. My neck and shoulders began to swell. This was the first time that FOP had affected my facial characteristics, which was very mentally challenging. The swelling eventually went down, and I didn't lose any jaw or much neck mobility. Then my arm began to swell in April. I had flare-ups in my upper arm and forearm. They eventually moved towards each other, and I lost the ability to straighten my right elbow. Most recently, I had a flare-up in May 2019 that locked my jaw. I have about 2 millimeters of opening between my teeth. This has by far been the most challenging flare to date, both physically and mentally. Along with my locked jaw came harder obstacles than I had faced before. I have always been skinny and I never had a huge appetite, but I was at a relatively healthy weight throughout most of my childhood. However, that all changed after my jaw locked. My weight began to drop dramatically. For me, I used to love food. I was the world's pickiest eater, but I would eat burgers and boneless wings for days. Not only am I not able to eat half the foods that I would on a regular basis before, but eating anything has become a physically and mentally taxing activity. Frequently, I have to stop eating or take breaks, not because I'm full, but because I don't have any more energy to get the food into my mouth. Because of the mental difficulty of eating, my appetite has nearly disappeared. I'm very rarely hungry anymore. The worst part about this is that I have to force myself to eat food even when I don't feel hungry. For as much as FOP affects my everyday life, I barely talk about it unprovoked. I try to suppress it to the moments where it's absolutely necessary and nothing else. However, I've recently realized that not talking about it is a detriment to my own physical and mental health. Not telling people puts me in anxious and possibly dangerous situations. Not only have I decided to share my story for personal reasons, but I also clearly understand my responsibility to raise awareness for FOP, rare diseases, and disabilities in general. As I sit before you today, I realize that it is both a privilege and responsibility for me to be an advocate. As far as people with FOP go, I'm fairly fortunate for the lack of progression of my disease. I'm still able to walk, stand, and travel with little difficulty. This makes advocating physically easier for me than others with FOP. It is my responsibility to speak for those that might not be able to come to events and share their own voice. Furthermore, the more awareness I can generate, the better the life of FOP patients everywhere. So many people in this world have never heard of FOP, and unfortunately, some of those people have FOP. The more awareness we raise, the less misdiagnoses and unnecessary exacerbation of the disease. And the more funds we raise for research, the more likely a treatment or a cure can be found. In an ideal world, maybe advocacy wouldn't always fall to those most afflicted. But until that time comes, I am now proud to be able to speak for people in my position.